Welcome back to the Fitness, Wellness, and Longevity Podcast. If you are new here, we're all about optimizing the health and performance of the ageless athlete. We have tons of different guests from the medical, nutrition, and exercise field. So if you're into that type of thing, please subscribe. In today's conversation, I get to sit down and talk with Lance Goyke. Lance is a personal trainer, even though he doesn't like to call himself that, who has a wealth of knowledge in working with what I coin ageless athletes. He considered them normal people. In today's discussion, we talk about converting his business online to strictly online personal training, how it was interning under Bill Hartman of iFAST, and his budding YouTube channel and all the challenges that come along with that. Guys, if you like today's podcast, make sure you subscribe, rate, review, share with a friend, and enjoy this conversation with Lance Goyke. Lance, how's it going today?
Doing well, Sean. How are you?
Where does this podcast find you?
Well, we are in the cloudy Scottsdale, Arizona. It's like the one cloudy day we've had in the last 6 months.
Now, this time,
but it feels great.
Yeah, this time of the year, are you getting some more mild weather, or is it still oppressively hot?
It's finally mild. Though the thing that I've gotten from the locals is this right now. This is why people live here, and I'm like, okay, well, could I get this in the summer? That'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah. So, how long have you been in Scottsdale now?
It's been since March, the third month of the year. Yeah, March.
And where were you prior to that?
We have recently been in the Northern California, San Francisco Bay Area, right next to Google HQ in Mountain View.
Oh, nice. Yeah. As a matter of fact, my brother lives in Redwood City now.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. I've got friends over there.
Yeah. He's a personal trainer, and he just signed up. He just started up with a great company called Alpha Hippie, which kind of integrates some of the masculine kind of teachings. So it's not just fitness; it's about becoming like more of a all that is man. You know what I mean? Accessing your masculine energy. Yeah. So Lance, full disclosure, one of the reasons why I had you on this podcast here is because Zach Couples recently shared one of your videos, and I was blown away by the production value and the just information that it had. And I looked at the number of views it had, and I'm like, I got to get to this guy before he blows up, because this might be the only opportunity that I actually get to talk to him, because at that point he's going to be too busy. Tell me a little bit about, your journey thus far to this point. Let's like in the context of sharing your knowledge on social media platforms, specifically YouTube.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for the good feedback. That it took a long time. So if I don't get some encouragement, I probably won't do it again. So thank you.
I'm the same way, brother.
I can give you the abbreviated version. I started working out. I joined a gym, and then I joined another gym called Indianapolis Fitness and Sports Training, and I had some really good mentors from both those gyms actually, and learned a lot about movement. Learned a lot about transitioning out of physical therapy, and I started kind of instructing as part of the group over there. I kind of filled in the gaps that anybody might have had. We had a guy who was really good with speed. He had mentored under Lee Taft, who's a really, really smart guy. And I had a guy who was a former PhD student that dropped out and was just like, I think there's something more to life. And he became a trainer, and now he became a software engineer. There's another guy who is now in his PhD, about to finish up. And they're just a bunch of mad scientists.
So I'll stop you there. So did you get to work with Bill Hartman while you were there as well?
He was probably the most influential mentor that I've had. Yeah.
Okay. And I can definitely see some of like, what is it about our mentors where we start to actually look like them? So if you ever watch this podcast, one of my mentors is this guy, Scott Hagness, and he's bald and has glasses. And obviously for those of you who don't know who Bill Hartman is, you could basically just say, oh, wow, that's Lance's doppelganger right now, or he's Lance's doppelganger.
Yeah, we should. I like perceiving that from both angles. So I like that you post them.
Yeah. Not to mention, Bill is low key shredded.
That's where we differ.
To the socks. Like, I'm like, oh, who did this bodybuilder that he did to these, like, he got like these pictures of doing pull-ups. And I realized like, oh, that's him.
Yeah. He wrote a book after he like did that. It's called No Pain, All Gain. And he just kind of, the way he described it to me, and maybe I'm outing him a little bit. He just sat there and he was like, I realized I was fat. And he just dieted for 6 months and he was shredded. And now he's got these habits that keeps him shredded.
Good for him. Good for him.
Yeah, good for him.
So, going back to your origins of training and that kind of stuff, did you have an athletic background at all, or was it just like strictly to like, hey, I just want to get in the gym?
So very mild athletic background. I played hockey in high school. Well, I played hockey since I was 5, ice hockey. And I played all the way through high school. I tried out for a junior team and I didn't make it. And I was just like, well, I guess it's time to start studying because I'm not that athletic. I was always pretty slow. I'm like 5'7". So there's no way that I can play at a really high level. Yeah, it's the camera. Exactly. I just make sure nobody's next to me.
So, so then you start up with iFAST and, what was you said you transitioned from physical therapy there. Was there something going on or was it? I
had not transitioned from physical therapy, but I kind of learned Bill's outlook. And that's what I mean by that.
Okay.
Just trying to help our clients transition out of physical therapy, kind of like keep the pain away as best we can, but still give them some sort of fitness effect.
Got it. So in working with Bill and then obviously branching off and doing your own thing, what are the biggest takeaways that you've seen thus far from where you started to where you are now in terms of that transition from, okay, I'm an injured athlete to now I want to optimize my performance?
For me as a coach, at least, it's been, I just do a lot less. I think I was working far too hard and putting in more noise than signal, I guess.
And are there specific ways or specific instances you can remember that, or examples that you can give where you're like, this maybe, this is too much.
I've got one cued top of mind. I'll never forget. We had a client who they gave to me when I was an intern. And it was my first client. I wrote her program. We did her assessment together. I kind of like led it, but Bill led me. And then I wrote her program. Man, this was probably 10 years ago. And I wrote her program and I took her through her session and her warm up was an hour and a half. It's just so bad. I was just like, I had no idea at the time, but now I'm like, there is no way, ma'am, that you enjoyed that session. It's one of my biggest shames that I'm okay with talking about now because I don't feel like I do that anymore.
So obviously shorter warm-ups would be one thing, but was it the fact that you just wrote too extensive of a warm-up, or was it the fact that you took forever to like nuance wise to like teach everything very, very like in depth?
It was a little bit of both. I've definitely refined the way that I deliver the cues now that it, isn't so verbose. But primarily it was what I wrote. We had just in the assessment, we had identified all these limitations. So I addressed every single one of them in like every possible way. We probably foam rolled for 10 minutes just because, there was a rotation deficit when turning to the right. So we need to make sure that we get the left paraspinals more than the right paraspinals.
So it got that in depth, huh?
Yeah.
So now that you're kind of on the other side, able to grin and take some wisdom out of that, I know this is a nuanced answer, but how do you prioritize and then execute with a client now?
So that is a nuanced answer. So I guess let's start with who is the client. Most of my clients are normal people. Okay, half of them are.
Define normal.
Normal meaning they are weird and totally unique.
That's a great answer.
half of my people are people that I mostly just write programs for that kind of have athletic aspirations, maybe have dealt with injuries in the past and just don't want them to rear their head again. And then the other half of my people are people I've had for a while, but are, day job, career is primarily my focus, family is primarily my focus, but I don't want to die early. So they've
So the
seeked out a trainer.
longevity and optimization crew.
That is, yes. And that is where my head is normally at when I'm training them, though I like to still periodize and say, hey, you are being a bit of a wimp. So we have to try hard at least 1 week out of these 4.
And okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. So do you find that the clients that you work with have issues with intensity, or is it more they only want to do the things that way they want to do?
I have less of the they only want to do the things they want to do crowd. Most of my people live in Northern California, and
Okay.
they tend, I think the personality there tends to be a little more open, but also a little more passive. And they're not really sure what they're capable of. I have some people who, it's a spectrum. And all I try to teach them is like, hey, from a periodization standpoint, right? So this previous week, I gave them a deload week. So volume's a little bit lower. I didn't actually take intensity down very much. And people are coming into this week feeling good. It's like a no meetings week. Work isn't that bad. We took it kind of easy on training for at least for the people that I see pretty regularly. And now I'm like, all right, let's push it. And I want you to go up, 10 more pounds than you think you should go up. And it's, I don't know, it's just trying to teach them that, hey, sometimes, you don't have to do this every time you train, but you are capable of more than you think you are.
How do you balance that out with not killing someone?
Yeah. Uh, I, I, the, I think primarily the way that I address it is just how do you come in? How do you approach me during the session? Who are you on this day? I have, everybody's, like I said, they're normal. They're unique. If stress is high, if they, had meetings for literally 6 hours that day, I'm not expecting a whole lot, but maybe I'm gonna say, hey, how you doing today? And then I just judge based on what they say. If they say I'm feeling good, then I know they are feeling fantastic. And if they're like, it's fine. And then I'm like, okay, let's warm up and see how you're doing.
Yeah. And that's kind of that auto regulation there. Now, that being said, you're doing most of your stuff remotely now, right?
Absolutely, all of it.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So are you doing your training like via Zoom, or is this all programming based?
Most of it's via Zoom. Like the
Okay.
bulk of my training is via Zoom.
Oh, nice. Okay. So at least you get those touch interactions with people.
Yeah, I can see the facial expressions that they make. I can see how they respond to fatigue. And those two pieces, and I can give them feedback that's pretty much instantaneous. So those things make it, it takes a lot more time to coach somebody when you're there for every session that they do, but they're, so it's more expensive, but it is more valuable.
So obviously, the time that they are, or the hourly time, like if they're on time or not, that probably makes a difference as well. If they're 5 minutes late, you're like, I know they were probably doing something important before this, so that's factored in as well.
Yeah.
What do you? How long have you been primarily based on Zoom?
Since March of 2020.
Okay, so basically, lockdown happens. Old Lance
Yep.
goes, we're flying into the future.
So I've always liked computers, and I kind of have this 4-hour work week dream of being able to work wherever I want, not necessarily working 4 hours a week, but having the flexibility. And I kind of wanted to do this, but the market was not ready, and having them forced to be ready was actually really good for my business.
So there's probably a lot of trainers who are like, dude, I'd love to work from anywhere. let me just get on Zoom and start working with clients. What do you find differentiates you from the rest of the pack?
In general, most of my referrals come from other professionals. Generally, it might be a client that is a really good person, but this other trainer just doesn't have the bandwidth to coach them. Maybe it's a physical therapist that can't do coaching, needs to do physical therapy. They just need somebody to help deal with the idiosyncrasies of this generally very nice person,
So I walk carefully here. So you have some needy clients.
Sometimes. Yeah. I love them though.
Now
it is fine.
Yeah. Now that being said, those needy clients, when you provide their needs, they scream from the rooftops of how great you are, right?
Yeah. Retention is generally pretty easy. It's the getting the new people that's the hard part.
For sure. So like once they get in the tent and they see what you do, you're like, they're sold.
Yeah. Pretty consistently. I mean, some people are like, you're too weird for me, but for the most part, everyone's fine.
Has someone actually said that to you?
No.
Or is that what you're inferring?
That's what I'm inferring. Yeah. The type of person who doesn't like my training is the type of person who likes to do loud classes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I don't know if this surprises you, Sean. We've only known each other for 30 minutes here, but I am not a very high energy person usually. And so when I have somebody who identifies with, being super analytical about what their body is doing and stuff, then I have two things. One, they like the way that I speak to them. But two, I also need to be careful to not feed that too much, because then it just turns into a 1 hour thinking session rather than training.
For sure. I've definitely had those instances where I'm like, have you even done anything yet? Have we physically done anything? You're not even sweating right now. All right. So let's go into a typical training session with Lance. And by the way, can you pronounce your last name for me? It's Goyke?
Yeah, you got it. It's
okay,
Goyke.
Perfect. Goyke. All right, good. So Lance Goyke, what is a typical training session look like for a quote unquote normal person?
I like that we're coming back to that. Typical training session on Zoom is we click the link at roughly the same time and we both show up and I say, hey, how are you? And usually there's no technical difficulties, but sometimes there can be. And for the most part, it varies widely. So if I'm going to give you two scenarios. One scenario is somebody shows up between 0:00 and 0:05 of the hour, because all my appointments are on the hour. And I just say, hey, how you doing? And they say, oh, I'm good. And how was your weekend? And they say, oh, it was pretty good. We did this. And then I say, oh yeah, we did something like this as well. And then I say, okay, well, how about we start with a rock back? And that's how it starts. And we start warm up for 10 to 15 minutes. And then for the most part, I am not saying this is what we're doing next, because we are sticking on a program that we're doing for 4 to 6 weeks. So most people remember what's next. And I've started to give them the sheets as well. And some people are opening them and kind of following along, and that's making things a little easier. And then we just, if it's a metabolic thing, I say, all right, get your pants ready because we're putting the timer up. I want you to, and I'll coach like, this week is a deload week. So I want you to go about 70%. Okay. If we went 99% or 90% last week, I want you to go about 70%. That's going to save you for some recovery for next week, where I'm going to ask you to go a little bit faster. And then we just kind of go. And I'll do the same thing with, like a strength workout or whatever. Say, hey, we've got a long rest here. I want you to beat. This is a slow program. This is kind of lazy, but when you're going, I want you to try really, really hard.
Okay. So let me ask you a couple things here. One, I know that you structure people's training into these training blocks, but do you find that kind of life gets in the way for a lot of these people and you have to kind of change things on the fly? Because I know for me, I kind of get dejected when I have this beautiful scheme and I go, oh man, this is gonna be awesome. And then they come in and be like, oh, my 3-year-old has been sick for the last 3 days and I haven't slept. And I go,
yeah,
well, there that goes. So how do you balance that out?
So I've thought about that a lot, actually, because I used to write really, obviously I told you my story with my first client, really extensive programs. But after that, even I would write these programs and then people wouldn't do them. And that is demoralizing. And, it's probably, aside from scheduling, it's my least favorite part of the job. And what I decided to do was I say, okay, let's use some creative constraints. Let's write one program that will work for everyone within, 10 degrees or 10% of error or whatever. So I might write it as a very general, we're going to do a push here, we're going to do a pull here. And then, hey, I got one guy who's super twisted. He's got ankle problems. He's got back problems. I say, okay, well, you're going to do your warm up that you got from the physical therapist instead of the general warm up that I give to everyone else. And that's an element of specialization for that person. And then I might cue that exercise a little bit differently and say, you're going to do, alternating unilateral variation of this exercise instead of the meathead bilateral heavy variation.
Where are your clients usually working out?
Their living room.
Oh, okay. And equipment wise, do they, is it vary from person to person, or do you have some kind of prerequisite for people to start out with you?
I don't have a prerequisite. The way that I frame it is I say, one, it'll be a lot easier for me if you buy dumbbells. But also I just say, we're going to be able to do a lot more stuff if you have a little bit of equipment. I started everyone at the beginning of the pandemic because I wasn't sure how long this was going to last. I started everyone just saying, hey, if you put $100 into exercise bands, resistance bands, we can do a lot with that. And I had a few people who got really strong and actually kind of outgrew the bands. Like if you're deadlifting against the band, the band started to evert their foot instead of being hard to deadlift, So I think all of my people have adjustable dumbbells up to at least 50 pounds. Some have up to 90s. I don't have everyone who has that, but pretty much everyone, and especially anybody who needs it, has that. I have some people who have 50s that need more, but it's not too big an issue. I just say, well, you're going to have to do twice as many reps.
So that's actually a great question that we spoke about. It is you mentioned resistance bands, but dumbbells up to 55. Are there any, those who are listening here, are there any pieces of equipment that would be worthwhile for someone to pick up if they had, say, a last minute Christmas gift or holiday gift they needed to get out to somebody or buy for themselves? What would you like people to see them get?
It might have to be late at this point, but I would say if you have somebody who doesn't want a huge investment, the bands are a great idea. That's kind of my idea with that is your gateway, because I can tie it to somewhere or I can anchor it with my body and I can do pretty much anything with it. I think the best first investment is a set of adjustable dumbbells. Yeah. You can do bench press on the ground. You can bend over and do rows. You can even do deadlifts. And, most of us are familiar with squatting with barbells and stuff, but you can do them with dumbbells and it works fine.
And I know this is going to be more for the coaches here, but how do you, would you call yourself a PRI influenced coach? Or is it more of a strength and conditioning iFAST influence coach, or is it somewhere in between?
I would like to think at this point it's somewhere in between. But I'm definitely influenced by both of those influences. I have taken probably 24 PRI courses between home studies and just going through manuals and stuff. And it's that between that and I think what really helped me out was going through that with my coworkers and with Bill, kind of like walking through it with me. Because, at that point, I had only had, 4 or 5 years of experience when I first started getting it. And I could take the things in the manual and I could say, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. But I didn't really know what that looked like on a person. Whereas Bill had 20, 30 years of experience at that point, and he was just like, yeah, you just got to fix it. You're doing it wrong.
I often sometimes want to break my computer when he says something that's like, yeah, you just got to do it. I'm like, oh, thanks. And I literally snap my computer in half.
And then I buy another one.
Did you feel that way at all at times when you were working with Bill?
Actually, not really. The I have like a vivid memory of coaching somebody doing a hip lift. So you're laying on your back, your knees are bent, your hips are bent to 90 degrees, your feet are on the wall, and you're just doing a posterior pelvic tilt. And I had somebody doing that and it wasn't helping them at all. And I couldn't figure out why. And Bill just came over and said, shut your abs off, shut your abs off, shut your abs off. And then they shut their abs off and then it worked. And then they felt their hamstrings and they, their tests improved, whatever, we were looking at. And it was just like, okay, that was, I'm a little bit ashamed that I didn't catch that, but that's going to save me a lot of time in the future. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah. I could definitely see that as that's something that I've been personally working on. But then, once you work on something yourself, you see it in everybody that you work with. You go, oh no, that alien coming out of that person's stomach probably shouldn't be happening when they're trying to do a hip lift. So in working with bands and that kind of stuff, is it harder to, I guess, apply the principles of iFAST and all that other stuff when you're using limited pieces of equipment, or do you find it's not that big of a deal at all?
It's not that big of a deal. I had to just kind of let go of this mantra that everything had to look like powerlifting a little bit. Cause that was after I gave up on hockey, I started doing powerlifting, and that was where my hip pain really started to settle in. But I just liked that setup. I read some articles that said, you got to do the big 3 plus the overhead press and, or pull up or whatever. And I don't know, getting past that I think this has actually been good for my coaching because I need to be more flexible now.
And that was actually a topic that I wanted to hit on with you because you put up some videos about static stretching and that kind of stuff. And I wanted to get your thoughts on the world of mobility and stretching and not only for yourself, but how you apply it to individuals versus the plethora of information and dogmas that come from each side of like, no, you can never stretch. What are you really doing when you're stretching? You got a kin stretch. What pails rails? You know what I mean? So like, I'd love to get Lance Goyke's perspective on stretching.
So I probably don't come off as moderate in this normally, but I would like to think that I am pretty moderate. I think for myself, having taken a bunch of these advanced movement courses, like I don't see why I would really stretch very often. It's not that I don't see some benefit in it. It's obviously a parasympathetic input. But if you're if you want the types of mobility that are superhuman, you're going to have to stretch into that at some point. You got to get used to it. So it makes sense when you do it there. And I tried to outline. I did this article that kind of started a new, it's kind of a series, but what I'm trying to do is write a couple things instead of, this is what I'm thinking today. I want to write a couple things that are super comprehensive that will stand the test of time. And I thought about quad stretches. I was like, okay, well, if I had to do quad stretches, I would do these ones. But I probably wouldn't do quad stretches, and here's why. But also, I might still do them and I might still give them to you, and here's when I would do that. So I tried to outline all of that in a succinct 15,000 words.
Yeah, not to mention that the video accompanying it was really, really well done. And obviously that's something I want to talk to you. We'll put a pin on that. But so in terms of like stretching for yourself, you mentioned these super physiological ranges. Would a normal quote unquote person need stretching in your mind?
So I still like the idea of dynamic stretching,
Okay.
where you're doing an exercise, you're actively controlling your body, and then you're trying to bring it through your full range of motion. Like that makes a lot of sense. Dynamic warm-ups, quote unquote. I don't know if we still call them that because it doesn't seem very descriptive, but those I think are still useful. Static stretching, unless it's what the client is asking for, I think it's pretty much a waste of time for most people.
Yeah. And why do you say that, or what has changed your beliefs when it comes to that?
The generally somebody's coming to you not because they want to stretch, they're just stretching because they think they're supposed to stretch. And generally there's an underlying physiological limitation or anatomical limitation that is probably more physiological than anatomical, I suppose. That is the reason that they think they need to stretch. And usually I think we can give people exercises that influence that physiology, that neurology, the brain and nervous system. I think we can influence those things, get the outcome that they think they need from stretching, and then they'll be like, oh, well, I guess I didn't need stretching.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when you just said that, I thought about one of my clients who we never stretch. I don't really. There's times when I do it again, especially if someone in particular is sympathetically toned. I'll like, all right, let's just chill and like for 5 minutes and just hold some static positions just to kind of like calm your ass down, and then we ramp things up. But I noticed he mentioned the other day. He goes, look at my toe touch. And I go, dang, that's really good. Like compared to, he's like, I couldn't touch my kneecaps when we started. And I'm like, yeah, come to think of it, I don't think we've ever really like done too much like stretching. He goes, but I feel strong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that clicked for me. I'm like, we do a ton of RDLs and deadlifts and all that stuff, which is full through ranges of motion. But we've never really had to stretch him to get there, right?
Yeah. I think some of the most pathologically long hamstrings that I've seen are on lifter type people, maybe like a CrossFit type person, or maybe like myself, I'll say, where they set up with a really strong arch in their back. So they're standing up anteriorly pelvic tilted, and their hamstrings are already on stretch, but they're so flexible that they can't feel it because it's just so long. If you throw them on their back and you lift their leg up, like it'll go 130, 140 degrees. If I keep that arch and then I bend over for an RDL, I'm throwing it on max stretch, and I'm throwing in like a weight to help me get down there even further, past maybe what my physiology is capable of handling. That's a really good way to get superhuman levels of hamstring flexibility, though I don't think most people want that.
Yeah, as you said that, the person who came to mind, or the YouTuber that came to mind, was Knees Over Toes guy. Have you gotten some have you seen that before?
The Knees Over Toes guy, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Not really. I don't watch the news very much, and I kind of bulk him into that.
Knees Over Toes guy is the news. So, I mean, all right. So I don't want to throw shade at anybody, but the issues that I have with a lot of like stretch guys and gals out there is like, what are you stretching, and what are you actually thinking you're doing when you stretch? And, you mentioned a little bit of it before about like, neurology and stuff like that, but like, what is the perception of what people think they're doing, and what is the actuality of what people doing when they stretch, Lance?
People think that when they stretch, they're making their muscle longer, but what they're actually doing is they're inhibiting their muscle. So there's less tone, and it allows it to get longer.
And why is that not good? Or why is it good? What like, I guess, go ahead.
So it could be good if you've got, like you were saying, like somebody who's really toned up, they've had a really hard day already, and they need to just calm down because they're going to be spazzing out. If I have that extra tonicity, I can't access my mobility. mobility that I have, inherently in my body, in my joints, right? If I remove the nervous system, the joint would move in very predictable ranges of motion. The problem with it is that it's not a very good way of doing that. It does shut the nervous system off, and there's been a lot of research saying that it makes you weaker. So if you're preparing for a strength workout, it doesn't make a lot of sense to do static stretching beforehand, unless it's to improve a position that will allow you to be strong, like improve your positioning that allows you to be stronger during your strength stuff. So a reasonable example would be, I've got somebody with a relatively okay amount of neurological tone, but they might still have some capsule stiffness. Let's say, for example, their neck and their rib cage are nice and relaxed. They've done a lot of thoracic mobility stuff, but they still have adhesive capsulitis or some sort of restriction in the capsule of the shoulder joint. Well, doing a sleeper stretch where you're, IRing your internally rotating your shoulder might actually be good, as long as it's in a position where you're actually stretching the capsule, if that's the limitation. And the idea of stretching the infraspinatus is not, like, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. The problem is, if I hold those static stretches and I shut the nervous system off, the body responds by just turning up the tone. So people generally feel really good right after they do it, but it makes things worse over the long term, harder to fix.
Got it. I think you put a nice bow on that topic there, Mr. Lance Goyke. I had a couple other things that I wanted your perspective on: hypertrophy training, and specifically hypertrophy training when it comes to movement limitations. So this is something that I personally have, like a personal qualm with, is like, okay, I want to improve my mobility and movement capabilities, but I also want to look yoked. So, so how do you manage those two worlds there, Lance?
Absolutely. Hypertrophy training is nicer, I think, than strength stuff like powerlifting stuff, because you're inherently limited by what you have to do in powerlifting. But bodybuilding, some people might say it, but you don't really have to do any one exercise in particular. Like, you can get pretty jacked doing machine-based work, and maybe that would be fine. The problem will be that you have to train really hard, and to train really hard, you need a lot of nervous system drive, even when you're fatigued. And when you get a lot of nervous system drive, you turn it up and you restrict some mobility. So it's not to say that there aren't some jacked people who aren't flexible. But if you're prone to being really stiff, you're probably going to get more out of your hypertrophy training by improving mobility first, and then trying to maintain it while you go.
I think that's a fair answer. Now, one of the limitations that I see with a lot of my clients, and again, I lump myself into this here, is rib cage stiffness.
That's the biggest one.
Have you interacted with this and confronted this? And what are your best pieces of advice for that?
So this is a heinous problem, because it's really easy to stiffen the rib cage, and it's really hard to loosen the rib cage. You can do the best example is, like, if you take someone through a dynamic warm-up thing where you're twisting and you're doing like the world's greatest stretch kind of variation.
Yeah.
People who are jacked and are not very mobile through the rib cage will sweat so much when they do that. And it's not that it's hard. It's not that they can't hold themselves in a plank while they move their legs, right? Yep. It's because there's so much stiffness in their rib cage that they have to oppose if they're going to reach their arm all the way up. So you have to be able to treat those mobility exercises not as a totally calm kind of thing. You need a lot of tension, but you need it only in the places where you need it. But you can't, for example, like something like that, if you do it and you rotate and you stiffen your neck up and you turn your neck with your hand, that's probably not going to help your rib cage mobility too much, because now you're not dissociating the shoulders from the head, right? And I just need to introduce that fluidity.
Okay. And so, you mentioned like, thicker, more muscular toned people, but I notice it actually most in my female clients. Like when you throw them in that like plank rotation position in like a kind of like a mountain climber position, and they do that
Mm.
rotation. I don't know exactly what you call it, kind of like a warrior pose ish. They flop their arm completely back, turn internally rotate their shoulder. They have it pointing straight to the sky, but their sternum is still pointing toward the ground. Like, do you ever encounter that?
Yes, and that's your point about, do I have mobility where I need mobility?
Yeah.
So when I introduce thoracic rotation, if my upper body turns, I need that mobility to come from a lot of places. We measure it by, okay, how far vertical is the hand reaching, or how far has it rotated? Because sometimes it goes past vertical, like you're saying. But if I don't get that from every joint, that should help this kind of like synchronous movement. It's easy to think about, or easier at least to think about lifting your arms overhead. When you lift your arms overhead, you got two joints that actually do the movement. One is the scapula turns, and one is the shoulder joint rotates within the joint, right? The ball rotates on the tee. So when you have somebody like that, they have a lot of ball on tee, shoulder joints, science word is glenohumeral joints movement. And it's probably too much, but then they don't have the fluidity and mobility in the rib cage that allows the shoulder blade to go. And there's three components to it, right? There's the shoulder joint, there's the scapula, and then there's the base under the scapula, which is the rib cage. So you might be restricted in those more proximal rib cage and shoulder blade stuff, and way too mobile because you're living a life there where you want to do what you want to do, and they said lift your arm up, so you did it the way that you know how to do it.
Yeah. And so, I'll leave you this last one because it's something that comes up very, very often with my clients, and I imagine you probably see it as well. It's described as the posterior mediastinum in the PRI world. It's considered the dorsal rostral area in the iFAST Bill Hartman world, upper trunk in the Zach Couples world, but for Lance Goyke, what is your go-to when it comes to getting that orthotic for the scapula? Like, is there a go-to exercise concept way that you approach it for the individuals that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, I will explain concavity and convexity to people. So the rib cage should be round, and the scapula is round because it's a bone. If the rib cage is flat and the round thing sits on the flat thing, it's not very stable because it doesn't have a lot of surface contact. It can't distribute the pressure. And that's easy to explain if somebody has shoulder problems, but I probably don't go into that specifically if they don't have shoulder problems. My go-to fix is the rock back. You sit on your hands and knees, you tuck your belly up so that you get a slight posterior pelvic tilt, but you're not crunching a whole lot. And then you just rock your butt as far back towards your heels without touching them as you can. So you're kind of hovering in the bottom of a squat, but it's not loaded the same way. And then if you can, it depends on how stiff they are, right? I might stop them there and just keep your hands on the ground because they can't crunch over anymore, especially people who are overweight. That's a better variation for them usually. But I would like to get you with your elbows on the ground, keeping the belly pulled up and a little bit of tension there while you breathe in. Because the way that people will mess it up is they'll just seep the air out of the sides of their abs instead of directing it backwards to the posterior mediastinum.
Yeah. And I noticed that a lot of the clients that I work with will do like a really hard crunch using kind of rectus muscles.
You see that hump in the middle back?
Yeah.
Yeah. All the time. That's a big one. That tells me you are not using your pelvic floor when you breathe. So I found like the first cue I'll give is just, let's try to fix that position, straighten out a little bit, try to stay long from tail to the top of your head. And that helps, but it doesn't necessarily give them the tension that they need. And as they exhale, they tend to crunch again and again and again, just kind of ratcheting it on every breath. The best cue that I have for that exercise, but I'll give you two, is I want you to push the base of your neck up towards the ceiling. And if you're in person, you can kind of tap that area and say, just make sure you bring this up. But the biggest thing is I want you to breathe into your butt.
Yeah.
When you breathe in, you should feel some stuff moving around. I know there's no lungs down there. Some of my analytical people will be like, that's not possible. Like, well, the fluid, there's water in your gut and it's got to go somewhere. It goes down, hopefully. So breathe into your butt and push the base of your neck up during the rock back.
I love those two pieces of advice. Now, Lance, you do have a online course that you're going to be launching. Can you tell me a little bit more about it?
Yeah. So this is, it's called the Movement Seminar. It's structured more for coaches, but anybody who's really into fitness and who's kind of like trying to work through maybe their own mobility problems, but usually it's a coach who's filming their clients' mobility problems. Somebody who's, you got something and you're not sure quite how to fix it. What we do is we get together as a group over the course of 30 days. And I give you 3 assignments every week. You have a call at the end of the week with your classmates, and you just I guide you through how I would think about things, but I don't necessarily tell you exactly what to think. I might offer, hey, this is what I like. But most of it's going to come from, these are prompts that will get you thinking about this problem, that will get you thinking about what the joints are doing during this activity. What is this exercise supposed to look like? If the joints are like that, what are the muscles doing? And how am I going to fix it? Like, is this person athletic? Are they going to respond to my cues? Or what am I going to do when it doesn't work? How am I going to know if it does work? So we kind of address all those things.
I love it, man. So giving back a little bit to the strength and conditioning community. Yeah. So I think that's awesome. And I really appreciate your time today there, Lance. And if we want to learn more about Lance, how can we do it?
I would just direct you to lancegoyke.com. I've got a bunch of links there in the menu and stuff. I've got a site where I sell some programs. I've got a lot of stuff on YouTube that's free. I've got a lot of articles on the site that's free. And hopefully somebody likes them somewhere so that they were helpful for someone.
Lance, please promise me when you have 1 million subscribers and are doing seminars in front of 1,000 people, you will remember me and you will come back on the Fitness, Wellness, and Longevity podcast.
Absolutely. I appreciate what you're doing here, Sean. This is a great talk. We definitely need everyone to check out your YouTube page.
Awesome, brother. I really appreciate it. Lance Goyke phoning in from Scottsdale, Arizona. Lance, have a great holiday season.
Thanks, Sean. You as well.
Take care, brother. Thanks again to Lance for coming on to today's podcast and sharing his wealth of knowledge of fitness and exercise with all of us here. Again, if you'd like to learn more about Lance, you can go to his website, lancegoyke.com, GOYKE.com. Guys, if you like today's podcast, do me a favor, go online, give us a 5-star review. It helps grow the podcast more than you know, and it's free to you. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe, share this podcast with a friend, and we will see you next time with a brand new episode of the Fitness, Wellness, and Longevity Podcast.